Spiritual awakening is often portrayed as a transformative experience that brings clarity, purpose, and inner peace. However, many individuals who undergo such an awakening find themselves grappling with an unexpected challenge, a profound loss of motivation. This phenomenon, though rarely discussed in mainstream spiritual discourse, is a deeply significant part of the journey towards self-realization. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, provided profound insights into this transitional phase, describing it as a necessary dissolution of the ego before the emergence of the true self. In this video, we will explore the psychological and spiritual dimensions of post-awakening demotivation, drawing from Jungian thought to understand its deeper meaning and significance. The paradox of awakening, clarity that leads to emptiness. Somewhere along the path of spiritual awakening, whether through a sudden revelation or a slow unraveling of personal identity, many seekers encounter a moment of profound stillness. What was once familiar becomes foreign. What was once motivating begins to lose its grip. This shift can feel like stepping out of a burning building into clean air, an initial sense of relief, followed by a slow, unsettling realization. Meaning itself has begun to dissolve. This is not a failure of awakening, nor is it depression in the clinical sense. Rather, it is a sacred pause, a recalibration of the psyche. As Carl Jung observed, enlightenment does not come solely through visions of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The process of seeing through illusions, be they societal, personal, or spiritual, strips away the scaffolding of false motivations, leaving behind a hollowed-out space where the soul once burned brightly. The paradox lies in the fact that many expect awakening to ignite passion and drive, yet for many sensitive souls, the seekers, empaths, and inward travelers, it does the opposite. It extinguishes old flames, not out of despair, but in a kind of sacred exhaustion. The question arises, why do I feel so empty now that I finally see the truth? The liminal space, between ego collapse and self-birth. Carl Jung described this stage as a sacred terrain between the collapse of the ego and the birth of the self. He called it a liminal space, a threshold of transformation that is both terrifying and necessary. During this time, the structures that once gave life direction begin to disintegrate. Ambition, achievement, external validation, all start to lose their power. Former goals feel distant, almost alien, as if written by someone else entirely. This is not regression. It is individuation. Individuation is the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are beneath the layers of social conditioning, roles, and expectations. It is the chrysalis stage of the psyche, where the caterpillar dissolves into formlessness before becoming the butterfly. Jung understood that this process involves a death, not physical, but psychological. It is the death of the false self, the persona, the mask worn for approval and performance. What follows this death is not immediate rebirth, but a period of stillness. The ego, having lost its script, becomes disoriented. No new narrative has yet emerged, and so the individual exists in a state of spiritual limbo. They are no longer asleep, but not yet fully awake. This is the essence of the post-awakening void, the alchemical darkness, nigredo, and the soul's descent. Jung referred to this stage as nigredo, or blackening, a term borrowed from alchemy. In the ancient practice of alchemy, nigredo was the first stage of transformation, a necessary breakdown of the base material before it could be transmuted into gold. Similarly, in the psychological journey of awakening, nigredo represents the confrontation with inner darkness, the unconscious forces rising to the surface. This phase may look like apathy, but it is anything but. It is a formative period where the soul retreats inward, rewriting its myth. It is not laziness. It is a sacred pause. The world may misinterpret this silence as dysfunction, but Jung warned against pathologizing it. Instead, he urged us to recognize it as initiation. During this time, the unconscious begins to rise, not as a villain, but as a messenger. Repressed emotions, unresolved grief, buried rage, and unmet needs begin to surface because, at last, there is space for them. The ego panics, demanding action, clarity, and direction. But the self, the deeper core of being, whispers, "Let go. I am forming something deeper." This is where the real work begins, not in achievement, but in surrender. Not in clarity, but in witnessing. The psyche is not malfunctioning. It is metabolizing years of noise, illusion, and false striving. The death of the persona, when the mask no longer fits. Much of the post-awakening emptiness stems from the dissolution of the persona, the constructed self that we present to the world. For most of our lives, our energy comes from this persona, the desire to be admired, validated, applauded. Jung saw the persona as a necessary stage of development, imposed upon us by societal expectations. But when awakening occurs, we begin to see the mask for what it is, a performance. Once we realize that the stage is made of illusion, the applause loses its meaning. The goals we once revered now feel foreign because they were written by a self that no longer resides within us. We feel aimless, not because we've lost direction, but because we've shed the identity that required a destination. This creates an eerie silence within. Like an actor stepping off stage and forgetting their lines, we stare into the void, unsure of what comes next. But this silence is not absence. It is a sacred pause, a quiet void preparing to be filled by something truer, something no longer forged from performance but from presence. Enantodromia. The pendulum swings. Jung introduced the concept of enantodromia, the phenomenon where something taken to its extreme transforms into its opposite. Nowhere is this more evident than in the aftermath of spiritual awakening. We move from the manic striving of the ego, "I must do everything," to the hollow stillness of the soul. Why do anything at all? This pendulum swing is not a sign of brokenness. It is the natural rhythm of balance. The psyche, long imprisoned in performance, collapses into rest. This descent is not pathology. It is initiation. In the language of myth, this is the archetype of the hermit, the withdrawal from the world before rebirth. It is the sacred cocoon where the caterpillar dissolves into formlessness, no longer crawling, not yet flying. Transformation, Jung insisted, begins in darkness, not in bypassing, not in good vibes only, but in descent. This is where modern spirituality often loses its depth by glamorizing awakening while avoiding its crucifixion. The emergence of the self, a new kind of motivation. Eventually, after sitting in the stillness long enough, something stirs. A new form of motivation emerges, not born of anxiety, urgency, or performance, but of alignment. It hums quietly, not roaring like the old fire. It moves not because it must, but because it would be a betrayal of truth not to. Jung called this the emergence of the self, not as an abstract ideal, but as a living, breathing compass within. The self does not chase, it calls. And what it calls us toward is not success, but wholeness. Living from the self means no longer hustling for approval or validation. It means responding rather than reacting, choosing peace over performance, following wonder rather than ticking boxes. This is not inertia. It is a new fuel, not adrenaline, but alignment. Not pressure, but presence. Living symbolically, the return to soul. Jung spoke of the symbolic life, a life no longer ruled by ego or convention, but guided by the deeper forces of the soul. Once the ego has surrendered and the unconscious is honored, life ceases to be a game of survival and becomes an unfolding of meaning. This does not mean constant certainty or perpetual bliss. Fatigue, doubt, and grief still pass through. But what disappears is the constant ache of self-betrayal, the dull exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that no longer fits. Instead, something shifts. You find yourself creating even when no one applauds, saying no even when yes is expected, following wonder rather than ticking boxes. You begin to trust the language of dreams, gut instincts, symbols, and synchronicities. Your life becomes a dialogue, not a monologue shouted into the void, but a conversation with the unseen, practical guidance for navigating the void. For those walking through this sacred silence, here are some key insights to hold on to. This is not a failure. It is initiation. You are not broken. You are undergoing a profound psychic shift. Do not rush the process. Transformation requires time. Resist the urge to numb or escape. This is shadow integration at work. Trust the stillness. Meaning will emerge in its own time. Be gentle with yourself. You are shedding layers, not losing your way. Create space for reflection. Journaling, meditation, and solitude can help navigate the inner landscape. Seek support. Find communities or mentors who understand this phase. Avoid forcing action. Letting go is sometimes the greatest act of courage, and stay open to subtle guidance. The self speaks in whispers, not commands. From emptiness to wholeness. If you have been wandering through the haze that follows awakening, staring into the stillness where your spark once burned bright, know this: you are not alone. You are not lost. You are being reformed by something far more honest. Carl Jung never promised ease, but he did promise depth. If you are here reading these words, then you are already walking the path. This is not the end of your awakening. It is the beginning of your becoming. And when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. Until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation. That is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born.